This gentleman right here is Grant Morrison, back from the dead. Back from the dead. And if there was going to be like a Mount Rushmore of comics, this guy would have his face on it. And yeah, I think you'll agree with that.
I think it definitely is. Right next to Jack Kirby.
Right next to Jack Kirby, yes, exactly. So here he is, Grant Morrison.
Oh, yeah. Is everybody in? Okay. We've been pretty much, I guess, talking about magic today, and I'm actually going to talk about magic for real, like what happens when you do it. And you have 30 seconds to process a Scottish accent, okay? And then I have no more concessions. I'm kind of interested. There's been a lot of different viewpoints on magic. One of the things I also don't want to do is talk at you, so I mean, people join in, right? Because I fucking hate this. Do you see just getting up and trying to be lecture boy? No, I want to talk to people. I need some communication. So, how many people here would consider themselves magicians or practicing magicians? Yeah, I figured. So that means we can talk. That's easy. That's good. The first thing I want to talk about is, before we start, sigils. There's been a few people who have mentioned it. Doug's mentioned sigils. We've heard all about them. But what I want to talk about is what actually happens when you do these things. And let's see if we can figure out what the fuck is going on, because things happen. It turns out that if you make these little glyphs, which are self-created condensations of desire into what look like witchy little alphabets, things happen. Things actually happen. Now, how can this be happening? How many people here have done sigils? How many people have found that they're very effective? That's just about everybody who's done them. So why isn't this technology available? And if it's not, then it's all down to us to make it available, like the way Tim Leary made acid available, and you just see what happens to society. That's what we should be doing. So I'm going to teach everyone who doesn't know how to do a sigil, to do a very basic sigil to start with, and that's when we'll start talking about magic, because sigils are basically the atoms of magic, I think. They're the first thing that you can do that's very simple to do and immensely effective, so they're utterly convincing. You can get what you want. You can get very bizarre things to manifest by using this technique. So here's how it works. This lad here. Let's say we want to make an intent manifest itself in the way things are. You think first, what do I want out of this? It tends to be a simple sentence. My desire is to visit the Omega Institute. Right, make it simple, because it's easy to do a simple one to start with. Don't say it's my desire to become king of the planet tomorrow. The chances of reality bending itself that radically to work with you are very slim. But if you sigilize for, I want to be a master of political theory, you may end up king of the world if you keep working with your sigils and your theory. But to make it simple, it is my desire to visit the Omega Institute. I write as well as I talk. Right, and the way this is done is you take out all the vowels, and you take out all the repeating letters. So that'll basically take us down to something that goes. You can shout out letters if I'm missing any. Something like that, right? So you would take that down, then you put it all together. And so on, and so on, and so on. And you keep compressing that until you might be left with something like, or some other appropriately weird and witchy looking shape. But basically that will be your sigil, and that is now desire reduced down into a glyph. The idea of doing this is to make it unconscious, and the idea is to forget this desire, which is easier said than done. It's pretty impossible to forget desires, but what you can do is create a lot of sigils and forget what the glyph stands for, which is quite helpful. Again, we're not going into theory at this point, we'll do that in a bit. When you do this, you're left with this thing which is, according to magicians, a condensation of desire, a perfect representation of what you want in pictorial form. Because it looks unusual, it means it doesn't relate to other things, so you don't have a lot of other baggage attached to it. It does purely what it's meant to do. It's a missile. the way to work these things is you have to charge them up. This is where we get to the good bit. This is where the sex magic starts. One of the most effective ways of charging a sigil is to hold it in your mind and visualize the whole thing as a very powerful and brightly lit object at the point of orgasm. Because at the point of orgasm, there's a kind of crack or hiatus in consciousness that allows these things to disappear in there and to start doing their work, whatever that work is. All we need to know right now is that it works. And in fact, everyone in the room should go out and try this immediately afterwards and see what the success rate is, because I'm quite sure the success rate will be pretty high. Everyone I've spoken to that uses this method has results. And again, we don't know why it works, but it's the basic technique of magic, and it actually does what it says it does. So the orgasm thing, you can either do it alone, and in which case it can turn masturbation into a much more sacred activity, or you can do it with a lover. You can have it on their heads and visualize it at the same time, or you can do it in a lot of other ways, because really all you're trying to create is that crack into which you can fire the desire. You can do this by dancing to exhaustion, and the moment you keel over, fire off the thing. You can also do it by, as I did once, bungee jumping, and I drew the thing on my chest and held it in my hand and jumped off, and the fear gave it so much power that the Invisibles came out of that, the comic book series that I did. You can do it by sitting in a graveyard at night and scaring the shit out of yourself until your mind goes blank and you project the thing. But these are all quite involving methods. The best thing to do is just get the zip down and get in there. Now, that's the basics. Beyond that, we're starting to get into stuff that's interesting because it's emergent properties here, stuff that Doug was talking about earlier, about narrative. I looked at this thing, the sigil, and as I say, I found that it worked. I could sigilize to meet people, I could sigilize to get jobs, I could sigilize to be places, I could sigilize anything, basically. I could sigilize to be here, which I did long ago, and now I'm here, fulfilling that. When I started doing the Invisibles comic book, the notion I had was that there was a way to extend this thing. It's a one-dimensional object almost. And I wondered what would happen if you took the notion of the sigil, and the notion of the sigil also goes right back to early cave paintings when people drew things on the walls in the hope that they could make manifest actual events. So if you drew a bison in the wall and stuck it full of spears, it would hopefully mean that your hunt would result in a bison stuck full of spears, because you'd made a model of the universe, a representation, and then affected the representation. And I think this is where it really works. This is voodoo, this is sympathetic magic of ancient cultures. What we seem to be capable of doing is making miniatures of reality. We can make little models, or we can make movies, we can make poems, we can make maps, we can make representations. The unusual thing seems to be that if you affect the representation, you can affect the reality. And I've found that it works in every case. So again, I want people to try this. I want everyone to try it. As Doug was saying, write your own narratives. Write your way into history. Write your way out of history, because it seems to work. If you make a model, my guess is that there's some kind of holographic thing. I don't know, if you make a representation of the world you live in, what you're making is actually a holographic splinter of the world. And if you affect the holographic splinter, you can have large-scale effects take place in the real world of which this is a model. So to illustrate, when I decided that it might be interesting to extend the sigil into narrative so that it wasn't just a one-off event, but to take it and run with it and implicate myself in it so deeply that real life and the world of the sigil or the world of the fiction would become intertwined. And it worked in the most outrageous ways. I started doing the Invisibles comic in 1994, I think, shortly after I'd had a major experience in Kathmandu where I was convinced I'd been abducted by aliens from the fifth dimension. And it was, very convincing. So I wanted to talk about these experiences and what was happening to people. And I noticed that a lot of people, particularly in the 90s, were undergoing this kind of alien abduction experience, this shamanic encounter with forces from beyond. Loads of my friends had gone through it. People who weren't even interested in this stuff were experiencing it. the alien head was turning up everywhere in our culture, quite spontaneously. So I got a feeling there was something going down. And I wrote the comic and I wrote myself into it in the sense that I made the main character this bald guy. And I had hair at the time, so I shaved my hair off so that I could be more like him. And I put him through certain experiences. And before I'd really realised how effective the technology was, I had this character, this poor bald bastard, King Mob, tortured on a chair. And one of the things that happened to him was his lung collapsed, and they convinced him that a flesh-eating bug, a necrotizing fasciitis, is eating through his face. Within 3 months, I'm lying in hospital, and you still see the scar. My face was eaten through, and my lung had collapsed, and I was dying of septicemia. Right. So I figured, okay, I was onto something here. On my hospital bed, as I was lying about to die, I was writing the issue of The Invisibles that saved my life, because I thought it was the only way I was going to save myself was to write my way out of this. And I wrote the character being rescued by another of the characters in the book who discovers that he has shamanic healing powers and is able to rescue this guy. So I get out of hospital. The next thing I think is, okay, I'm going to give him a good time. I'm going to get him laid. I'm having a really good time. So he gets off with a beautiful red-haired girl, and within 3 months, the beautiful red-haired girl is causing havoc in my life. Then I began to I found that I could write anything into comic. If I wanted to meet somebody, if I wanted to meet Richard Metzger, I could write into the comic something that would bring Richard to me. And it happened, we all met, we all hung out because of the comic. And really, I was trying to do what Doug said earlier, but Leary, find the others, like we're all trying to find each other here. And The Invisibles for me was a signal that I was sending out to say, look, I'm here, I'm experiencing this, I know you're all out there, I know you're doing the same stuff, and I kind of want to hang out and talk about it because it's really hard talking to people in Scotland about this. So by the end of the Invisibles, which ran for 6 years, I'd actually managed to transform my life completely until I was living this James Bond-style existence by the end of the comic. And that was kind of what I wrote in for myself to experience this. It was a small-scale ambition, really, to live like James Bond, but I wanted to see if it would work. So I wrote in the international man of mystery lifestyle and found that it happened. As I say, I wrote in people, I wrote in women that I wanted to meet, and I would meet them. And I also wrote in the salvation of our species. So here's hoping. You had a question, let's just talk, yeah.
I was wondering, when you were hospitalized, I know in previous interviews you indicated that was also related to more ceremonial.
Yeah. Well, that's where we're going next, is to talk about gods and those kind of contexts. So giving you this basic, the hypersigil, as I called the comic thing, is the idea of extending that through time and involving yourself so deeply in it that you can actually press buttons and make effects. And I mean, this is like Doctor Strange. I mean, real magic. And the person you want to meet comes through the door. And it does work. So again, the next part of that was that I started to do a lot of ceremonial magic. I've been doing this for a long time. And the first thing I read way back was when Aleister Crowley wrote in Magic that if you performed certain operations, certain things would occur. You would get a demon or an angel if you went through and said these particular phrases in this particular order. Which, I'm going bullshit. I'm a skeptical kid. And I tried it, and I got the demon. Demon manifested. There was no denying it. And this is someone not taking drugs, I was a straight edger until I was 32, completely. So I was doing magic for most of that time without psychedelics or without any drugs and still getting these effects. What I found is if you start taking psychedelics on top of that, you really see the demons, it really makes them visible. But it still works without it. So again, I want to make that point very clear that magic is not about drugs. Drugs can help, and drugs can loosen you up a little bit and allow you to maybe see the monster's 15 legs rather than just seeing a weird stress in the air, which is what it looks like when you're sober. But it really is not coming from these experiences at all. This thing is part of how we live and part of the way the world works. Yeah. This is boring, I can't move now. Yeah, okay. So I got the demon to appear. And I found out then if you summon up Greek gods, they would appear. If you summon up Lovecraftian entities, they appear. And I'd started to take it even further. I was reading stuff by the Chaos magicians in the early 80s, and their approach to magic was a kind of postmodernism almost, was to say that these things are all metaphors. And that's where I stand now mostly, and that's what we're going to talk about. But these things are metaphors for experiences. So when you summon, let's say, the Greek god Hermes, who's a spirit of communication, a spirit of electricity, and basically it's a complex of ideas that all involve communication. That same god appears in India as Ganesh. The same god appears in... where else would he be? Give me another culture. Yeah, Thoth. He's Thoth in the Egyptian. He's... Yeah, that's exactly. And there's a Celtic version of the same thing. So what I understood fairly quickly was that these things were cultural glosses on nervous system events. And I took it further when I decided to summon up entities that I knew didn't exist, like Jack Kirby's New Gods from the comic books. And you can actually summon up Jack Kirby's Metron, because Metron's also the spirit of knowledge and information and movement. You can summon up the spirit of war and anger, not as Ares, but as Jack Kirby's Orion. And you get Orion to visible people. I've seen Orion standing in front of me wearing that Kirby comic suit. So I can't assume that there is such a thing as Orion outside the pages of comic books, but what I have to assume is that nervous system events can be clothed in these glosses, that we can interpret them any way we choose, and we can dress them up any way we like. Which again is taking us back to the idea of the narrative and how we can actually write onto these things. To spin off in a slightly different direction, the subject of gods and the fact that there are 7 main gods in most pantheons, and they fit onto the classical system of planets, and they fit into the Kabbalistic Sephiroth. And they're all the same bunch. There's the war guy, there's the love goddess, there's the communications one, there's the earth one. They're basically all the same. There's the god of time in every single culture, the same bunch of people. Another interesting fact, which I think ties into this, is the fact that apparently there are only a very small set of human default personalities, which I've been reading about. It says that if you take any group of people, they'll form naturally into 6 different things. There's the leader, the bully, the coward, and whatever the other 3 are. You make them up. But apparently there's this bunch of things. And if you take any amount of people and put them on an island, they will fall into these roles. They also did this study where if you took 6 bullies from one group and put them on their own, the same roles would emerge. The one bully would become the coward, one bully would become the bully, one bully would become the leader, one bully would become the joker. If you take all the jokers from a pack, one joker becomes the leader, one joker becomes the bully, one joker becomes the joker, and so on through all these things. So what I began to suspect that maybe we had personality defaults that were being interpreted in the past as gods, because obviously there was a time in the past where people didn't have, or they say, according to current research, there was a time in the past where people didn't have the same connection between the 2 hemispheres of their brain. So if they heard voices in one part of their brain, they would assume it was an external voice. The same thing happens to kids when they reach self-conscious age, around about 3 or 4, or earlier than that even. You hear voices in your head. It's only your own voice. It's that voice we hear for the rest of our lives talking to us, which is the voice of our own self-consciousness. When you first hear that as a child, it often happens that you separate it off and call it an imaginary friend, which happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to a few people in this room. So we have the tendency when these things, these new cognitive advances appear in our heads, to see them first as separate or as other, and to stand aside from them. My feeling was, as I said, that the God forms and the God states that we reach through ceremonial magic are actually just specific downloads of these very specific operating systems. All of us have them, all qualities at once going through most of our lives. We can be angry, we can be weak, we can be strong, we can be very communicative, or our communication's not so good. what the magician does is focus on one of those aspects. If you want to summon up Aries, then basically all you're doing is summoning up anger, right? And we can all do it. We can all summon up Aries right now. Think of what you fucking hate. George Bush and his stupid fucking smug face, right? And looking at everybody like he knows better than us. George fucking Bush knows better than anyone in this fucking room. That's Aries, right? And here's Aphrodite. Now, George is okay. You have to look at it this way. His mother, when she held him, she loved the kid and she wanted it all to grow up right, but they knew he wasn't really as smart as they'd hoped he was. But, he's trying his best and we'll do what we can to look after him and make sure he doesn't fuck up. As long as you guys just let him be what we want him to be, he's got to carry the name and so on. And you can start to feel almost, oh, poor George. Yeah, I suppose he is. He's just stuck in line here and he's like Caesar, he's Bush the Second. There might be a better one, there might be a worse one. There could be Caligula Bush 2 generations down, we don't know. So I'm, to get to think of the man in a different way. If we choose to call that Aries, we could really summon that up. If we'd all taken acid and did what I just did, all of us at once, you'd have probably got a huge red guy with a horn standing up there cheering us on, because that's how it looks to altered perspectives. And people in the past obviously interpreted these feelings as a visitation by that horned, starry-eyed bastard. So, what does that mean for us? Anybody get any ideas? Who's done much ceremonial magic? And you summoned any gods? And how did it feel? Did you hear a voice from outside or from inside?
It's much, it's much more of an overwhelming sense internally and a sort of displacement or emotional, not quite emotional, but others with certainty you can't control.
Yeah. But at the same time, if as the magician you are controlling it, you're trying to carry that current.
How much do you attribute it to acting as an artist, to someone who willfully, like Howard was saying yesterday, he was saying that he becomes Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
And studies up on him and can actually, attack the world from his perspective.
Well, it's exactly the same thing. I mean, obviously, if you're going to summon a god, you have to study everything about them, all the attributes, and to know exactly what perfumes Mars likes. Mars likes cigar smoke, and Mars likes this and that. And these are all things that have been built up over thousands of years where people have been dealing with this force or this emotional input. I'm losing my train here. Yeah, what I was getting on to. So taking it beyond that, I actually summoned John Lennon, and he appeared. Right, so you can do anybody. You can do Mickey Mouse. I got Lennon, and again, yeah.
Is it eyes closed when you're sitting on it, or open eyes?
Open eyes. I mean, that's the interesting thing. What it is, and to try and explain how it looks, because when people say, I saw a demon, what does that actually mean? What happened when I saw these things? The Lennon, for instance, helped because I took a tiny little bit of acid, so that's a sacrament for John Lennon. But what I did was got Lennon albums. I put on Tomorrow Never Knows on a loop on my earphones and just played it over and over again, his most psychedelic song. I wore my paisley shirt, I got a Rickenbacker guitar and Beatle boots, and I put flowers up and I had pictures everywhere. And I just summoned up Lennon, and I just sat there and said, come on, John, come through. And what I got was a gigantic head in the middle of the room just rotating. And he gave me this song, a John Lennon song, which just sounds pretty convincing. I'd do it if I had a guitar. But you've heard it, haven't you? I mean, it's really weird, because in fact, I might do it at the end. So where does it lead us that we can actually make these things appear, that we can download what seems to be John Lennon and access John Lennon's songwriting ability and copy it and do these things if we can contact these gods? I think what it means is that people are simpler than we've ever thought they were, and that the way they operate is a lot simpler. And again, going back to that island of the 6 people, imagine you do that somewhere, civilization falls apart. You take a bunch of humans, throw them on the island, they organise themselves into roles immediately, and they start to build culture. So that's almost like nanomachines. That's something that is working on a very simple system. You could take any of us, we'd all become one of those roles of some kind. Throw us down someone, we'd have to take over. One of us would have to just say, this is bullshit. Yeah?
In terms of the theory behind invoking God, do you connect that to ideas of group mind and, sort of structural level of organic life? For example, if you're invoking John Lennon, it's not drawing Lennon out of ether so much as it's contacting wherever Lennon is in this sort of vast organism or part of it.
Well, it seems to be something like that, and it's also something like contacting your own version of the character, like you're making an image of him, which isn't, there was nothing like the real John Lennon. Obviously, he had a lot more complications than the giant chiming head that appeared in front of me. But what I was able to do was tie it into something that might have been in another era, Orpheus, who's a singer or a musician, God. Maybe that was Orpheus. If I'd seen that in a Greek temple in, 41 BC or whatever, I'd have thought it was Orpheus. Instead, I got John Lennon because I asked it to appear in the form of John Lennon and write me a Lennon song. Maybe all it was me getting in touch with the human ability to make music, which I've got to the point where I do think that's what's going on. I think there's a lot more of a materialistic base to magic and to the so-called entities we contact and to the people that we think are out there, the future beings and the higher dimensionals. I think there might be more to do with what's going on in our body than what's going on in higher dimensions. I've come to believe, as an example, that how many people have done DMT in here? Richard was talking about. In DMT, which is pretty much, everyone thinks this is the big alien contact, the highest psychedelic you can get. And it was Metzger forced me to try it one night, and I did sit for like 3 hours with a pipe. Went, no way, no fucking way. But it's exactly what you promised. It's exactly what Terence McKenna said, and everybody seems to go to the same place. There's a kind of space, a vaulted space. It's enclosed, but somehow feels infinite. It's filled with moving parts. It has structures that change shape, and there's a lot of information being exchanged constantly. There's voices, there's meaning. And I thought that was maybe me going to the 7th dimension until I read what the interior of the cell looks like in the human body. And a cell is like a bag of water filled with proteins which go super fast and exchange things and copy things and talk to each other and transmit. The cell has walls, it's bounded, but it probably feels infinite if you're one of the millions of proteins that are in there. And it's an exact description of the DMT world. So I'm beginning to wonder if there isn't just more to do with who we are, what we're doing here, these bodies. And it's not about the entities that are trying to talk to us are the things inside, and they're trying to show their processes and the way they look at the world. And deep inside that cell, you also have strings of mitochondrial DNA, which is a singularly interesting object because mitochondrial DNA goes back 3.5 billion years to the first life in the oceans. And the mitochondrial DNA that's in all of our cells is the same animal, right? We are literally connected by that. It's the same thing. So even if you want to talk about things like action at a distance, telepathy, it can all be looked at as mitochondrial DNA communicating. I should actually technically be able to communicate with your mind right now through the strands of DNA that connect us. So really I found myself in a position where the real beauty and the real magic is starting to come from just the way things are. And, again, Doug's saying this, we all seem to be coming a bit to the same place, that we shouldn't be looking out for things, we shouldn't be looking for aliens. There's enough alien life in here that we don't even have to look anywhere. And if we can't communicate with that, what fucking chance have we got to communicate with Martians? So I'm all for the psychedelicization of the normal, and for magic being used in a slightly different way than it's been used in the past. In the past, I think in a lot of ways magic defined people in a fashion sense, and it allowed them to stand against a church structure. And again, it allowed them to stand against repressive structures in the Victorian era, and later in the 50s when there was another huge upsurge of magic. But this time I think what magic has to be is not for the counterculture. Again, let's eliminate it. Let's take over. Magic has to be for everyone. We have to spread it. We have to give it to everyone. And we have to do it in a form that's understandable, which is what I'm working towards. And I'm hoping people here who are younger and get more time will do it better. Because I think what we can give people is a way of looking at the world that adds meaning and significance. That's what magic does. I actually think, bottom line is, magic is nothing but meaning. Magic is how we look at something and fill it with such significance that life seems to have a point. For instance, as I was saying, that this chair, you could just look at that and it's just a boring old chair. But if I tell you that many of the atoms in that chair once passed through Helen of Troy, Buddha, Christ, at least one of the atoms in this room will have passed through the guts of, any one of your favourite religious figures. Suddenly that chair takes on a lot more meaning. That's magic. An act of magic has just been done. I could go on further and further and take you back into the man who made it, the man who designed it, his entire life, his girlfriends, the whole deal. Suddenly the chair becomes significant. And that's the type of thinking I'm trying to advocate here, and to find language to express that to people so that they can start thinking that way. And it becomes things take on a higher perspective when you can see them through time, or you can see them as where the atoms were, or any of those things. Anything that makes that more than just a boring old fucking chair that looks like every other chair in the world, because it's a unique object in this space-time locus. None of us will ever see it again. Look, it's sitting there enjoying the whole thing. It loves us. And we'll never see it again. So that's how important that is. And think how important you are. Or him, or her. So really, let's try and think about things in that way and sacralize things a little more. And also to see ourselves as maybe less than we are, in a way, in the sense that these skin-encapsulated egos, as Alan Watts called them, think they're so fucking important. We're all that, but we're really not. We might just be vehicles for something else that's eternal and has lived since the beginning and just passes through us and dries us out. I like to call my body my time suit. This is what I use to explore time, and the conditions inside time are really ferocious. They pick everything apart. Nothing ever stops in this place. The whole thing's in movement. We're living on a blast fragment from the Big Bang. It's hurtled through space. We're currently traveling at something like 980 kilometers an hour, just circling. The planet's going through space. It's much more than that. We're separating from all the galaxies. Every single atom in your body was cooked in those first moments of the quantum gravity era. It's all still happening. We're living on a blast fragment. Everything's changing constantly. Our bodies are changing constantly. Once I was this size, and it wasn't so long ago, and then I went like one of those werewolf films, and then I'm big, and then I get shriveled, and it never stops. So what we should maybe try to identify with are the things in us that are immortal, and the things in us that do have longer lives, and the things in us that have maybe memory banks that sometimes you access in those strange states where you think you were someone 400 years ago. No, you are someone. As Doug said, you are someone 400. We are Helen of Troy. Right now, Helen of Troy is looking out across the battlements, and the same mitochondria is streaming through her into you and into you and into you. She is right with us in the room. Every single thing that ever lived is actually here inside us. And there's one strand connecting it all. So let's assume maybe it has the consciousness, and that we partake of that sometimes, and that allows us to maybe think of ourselves as immortal, or at least as disconnected from time, or with a different relationship to time. Can we have questions? I'm just babbling now.
So in a very real sense, you just make the statement, there's a part of your body that's 3.5 billion years old. Everyone else.
Yes. And it may well be thinking, something that's that old, what the hell is it doing? It's in that amount of the stuff. It's in everything. It's in all those trees. The same thing will be in there, So identify with that, yeah.
So the tail end of the invisibles talked about multiple personality disorder as a new way of life, and relating to what you call fiction suits and personas that we all put on. We all do put on personas as psychological. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on how that works, what you can do with it.
Well, again, I started to see that on certain days I could be a right miserable bastard, and on other days I could be a really funny guy, and it seems like quite different people. I mean, it really is quite different people, and they have different opinions, and sometimes I can look at the world and think, oh, I fucking hate that, and the exact same thing the next day, oh, isn't that the most beautiful thing I've ever seen? So the way magicians work with that is to actually access these states deliberately. Instead of being caught out and suddenly becoming angry when you should be loving, we should learn what the magicians learned, that these things can just be accessed and used as operating systems. If you have to be angry, then make sure you're in complete control of your anger and you know where it comes from. And if you want to call it Aries, do. But that, at least that allows you to separate anger off and let you know that it's kind of more like weather than it is like you. You know, it's not you, it's just something that passes on through you. So on from that, it seemed to me, I was, again, going back to the idea of the individual Doug talked about and the ego, and which began somewhere in the Renaissance and really took root in the Enlightenment that followed. And what happened was, I mean, I don't know how many people read Ken Wilber's stuff. I think Ken's levels are kind of interesting here because they might be a little bit of a description of what this is about. Back then, I think we had a point where people looked up to their kings and queens as mums and dads. People were like, again, Doug said this, we were in an infantile, childlike state, and we looked up to kings and queens and parents in a way that people don't do now. You know, the whole Clinton scandal was the moment where people stopped seeing the president as the dad. It was the moment where suddenly, oh, he just gets his cock sucked. Okay, he's not my dad. It's not like those old guys we used to have with their tucked up collars who looked as if they had rods up their back and always did the right thing. Suddenly, they weren't like our fathers anymore. So to look at the idea of the individual, I think, was created for the Industrial Revolution and the period that followed it. We needed to break away from the idea of gods and father gods and mother gods in order to have science, in order to explain the world in a different way, which was kind of the way it was being lined up to be explained now that steam had come on the scene. So science took over, and science demanded the notion of the heroic and the individual and the person who fought and tamed the world and classified the world. And they gave us that character which has been going on for so many hundreds of years now, we've forgotten that there might be other ways to live. You know, there are collective ways to live which don't involve the same type of personality that we have, the sovereign self as it was created. So the problem I saw with the sovereign self and its allied nation states was that at the limit of the self you find nervous breakdown and schizophrenia, because self means not self. The minute you decide there is self, it's not self. And this is a metaphor from immunology. But there's self and not self. If you say, well, you know, I wear black and I like to listen to the Beatles, and that's who I am. And if someone then suddenly says, what happens if I make you wear white and make you listen to Marilyn Manson? And suddenly, well, I'll no longer be me. Oh shit, you know. So what I wanted to do was try and get away from the sovereign self, because I saw that it could only end in a battle with the not self. And what we really needed was something that could actually open up and include more possibilities. That if you had to be a crazy guy today, you could be the crazy guy without always having to be the crazy guy. You know, if today was your day to be the genius, you can put on your suit and you can be the genius and convince everyone. But yesterday you were the crazy guy. So many people get trapped in just being the crazy guy because the individual egoic self says that you have to be one thing, and that is you. And it's really important for you to be one thing. It shows how heroic you are and how different you are from everyone else. But as I say, it leads to breakdowns. People are going crazy in the West where this is the standard operating self, because it reaches limits and the limits crumble, and I can't be that. You know, if you're straight, you can't be gay. If you're gay, you can't be straight. Well, why not? You know? So I'm saying you should be able to pluck out the one that says gay that day. Okay, today I'm gay, and I can do all that stuff, but that's because I want to do that. That's my operating system for today, but I won't necessarily, tomorrow I might decide to be celibate. And I saw that the only people who were really doing anything like this in any sustained and obvious way were the people who are being called multiple personality disorder victims. And actually what they were doing seemed to me to be the most sane response to the 21st century that I've yet to see. But unfortunately, like shamans and post-shaman societies, they've been classified as lunatics. And I don't think they're lunatics. I think they're the forerunners of the next mutation in human consciousness, which is a much more expansive consciousness, which is a consciousness that can allow itself to become other consciousnesses without losing its own sense of place.
Perhaps that's a byproduct of just a vast amount of culture and content that we've been swallowing in the past, especially since the advent of television. I think our ability to empathize and our ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes has been increased exponentially.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think definitely, and it's.
Pop culture, like Howard was saying, I guess pop culture is probably one of the things, we're not exactly sure what's going on there, but what exactly is it doing? And maybe that's like one of the key things, perhaps, is being able to empathize with anyone, regardless of what you as an individual.
No, I think you're right, because we can watch drama about a murderer and really get in his shoes, and then we can watch a drama about an ice skater and feel what it's like to be. We can involve ourselves in these things. Not only that, we can maybe see them as role models. I always advise men going out on a date to listen to James Bond music, because James Bond is just this archetype of the ultimate. I mean, he's an asshole, right? But sometimes you need to feel like, yeah, I'm James Bond. I'm James Bond. Shaken, not stabbed. So if you play Thunderball's magic, right? Thunderball's is this song to send you out thinking you're the king of the world. So that's just a way of putting yourself into something. You don't want to be James Bond. I don't want to go and have to kill people or hang under trains. But for the moment, I want to pretend I'm wearing a tuxedo and everyone loves me. So, yep.
We're talking about self stuff. Is it spirit? I mean, I guess intellectually, you have this feeling like, time's illusion. Mitochondria goes back forever, back into each other, and even pretend James Bond and do this. So there's still a you that's kind of behind it, or is it still, it seems like experientially, but it's not necessarily jump up. It almost has to pretend, be this, pretend be this, pretend be that. But there's always that kind of me.
Yeah, you're just not doing it hard enough. Because you should go, really. I mean, there's certain levels of it where you remains, and by you, I mean, what am I talking about here? It's what does that mean? Is it you with the way you're dressed, you the way you feel, do you have the same emotions, do you have the same clothes? In what way are you establishing yourself during these experiences?
Well, I guess there's that sense that, behind the words, behind the clothes, behind everything, you almost feel like there's a sort of constant individual that's there. And so, we talk about like mass.
That might be the mitochondria. You never know, it might be. Because I think the personas can become so strong. I mean, I've gone out in all kinds. I've dressed up in drag and went out, and I've been a skinhead, I've been like a hippie, and they take over. You become what feels like something else. And I know what you mean. There is something in there that still feels I'm still here and I'm still driving the bus, but that might be the mitochondria. There's also another funny thing which I had in my comic, The Filth. I just read this piece of information which fascinated me. The human body has something like 100 billion cells, but there are 100 times that of bacteria living on and in us. So we're outnumbered by bacteria 10 to 1. So if they were that covered in crawling living things, how much of what we hear in our heads could be their voices? How much of that mad chatter that goes on might just be them passing instructions and us trying to translate? Because we're utterly weighed down by them. There's many more of them than there are of us on us. So things like that keep me awake at night. Yep.
I was wondering earlier, you were saying, you made a comment like, I should be able to communicate with people who have confidence, both have aspects of themselves that are in there, but like, I can understand in a cell, and there's like food in there, and the proteins are like running back and forth, and they're actually trading chemicals. But I don't see myself being actually able to trade physically, like, that information with you, besides something like through a sound wave or something like that. I'm just wondering how you picture that, or what's your understanding?
Well, this is the thing I try to explain. That when I had this experience in Kathmandu, which, as I said, I thought I'd been taken away by aliens, but I don't. I think it's a cognitive jump now. I think it's just something that happens, and it seems like aliens because that's how we process our information. But what happened to me was, and this is what Crowley called the holy guardian angel experience. This is what shamans do when they get torn apart. It's just something that happens to people when they think in a certain way for a long enough time. And what happened to me was I thought the aliens had come into my room and pulled me off the surface of the third to the fourth dimension and into the fifth. And I was in the space with these information entities that were interacting with me. They were showing me what the universe was, and it was a tiny little thing in a nursery, and they said that's one of our children, and we grow it like that because only in time can we grow things. And so they were giving me all this immense download of information that I hadn't had before, and it seemed quite convincing and quite the cosmology was powerful. It holds up so much in my head that whether it was real or not as an experience in terms of aliens or entities, it rewired my head quite radically to the point where I don't have the same relationship to time or death or any of these things as I had prior to the experience. So I have to accept, as a nervous system event, it was immense. Aliens, whatever it was, it worked. But one of the major things, when I was shown the idea of all time and space as one single object by these so-called beings, it was a perspective from a higher dimension. So I could see all of time at once. It was like a topographical object. And over here you might have the dinosaurs, but down in a fold, right underneath the dinosaurs, there's this place. It's just we can't go around those corners. We don't have the apparatus to move back and forward in time. Yeah? Okay. So what I saw basically was the entirety of life on Earth as one thing. And this is, I've been finding this quite hard to explain since it happened, but I'll try again. Because it made it, the whole thing I'm talking about, the mitochondria, we are actually connected physically. Look, I could pull it. If you can think of this as a thought experiment, right, every one of us in this room was 10 years old once. Why can't we point to it? We know it was there, and we can actually use the eyes of memory to look at things that happened there, even though they're kind of fuzzy from this far back. We know what had to happen. We once had to be that size. Right, so that is there, down the track of my time and down the track of everyone's time in here. Basically, if you could see it from an outside perspective, what you would see is all my movements all fanning through each other. You would see me walking backwards out this door. You would see me coiling back onto an aircraft back to Scotland, but the aircraft would look like a thin tube just stretched across the Atlantic. You could take that right back, and I go all the way back like a tail into my mother's womb, and she goes all the way back, and she goes all the way back, and she goes and every single person in this room is going back like that. You can track yourself physically through time, because time had to happen for us to be here. Unfortunately, all we can see is the leading edge, because we can't turn round in time. If we could turn round in time, we would see ourselves as we really are, which is billion-eyed, billion-limbed processes. The processes then get sucked into their parents, and like I say, it all works its way back through what we would call evolution to the same point, which is the first mitochondria. We're actually literally connected like the branches on a tree. I mean, literally, like we're fingers on a hand. It's just we don't see it that way, and we don't live long enough, and we don't have the time perspective that allows us to see it that way. But we have the imagination to allow us to see it that way, and if we can see ourselves like that, maybe we could change a lot of things in the world, and maybe we could make people understand that you don't chop off your own hand unless you live in a Muslim country. That you should look after your fingers, that you shouldn't be thinking that branch over there is your enemy, because it's actually just a branch on the same tree, and really your sap all flows from the same root. So I'm trying to put that across as a metaphor for moderns, basically, and it takes the place of the egoic self and the individual self. It puts us in a more humble position with regards where we stand in time and space, but it also exalts us because it makes us part of a gigantic entity that inhabits this planet Earth. And there's actually a name for this thing I was delighted to discover. It's called the Biota. It's the totality of all life on Earth. I mean, no one uses that word to suggest that there is one animal. They just use it as the totality of life. But I'm actually suggesting the Biota is our name. That's who we are. We're like the little strands, where it's feelers, where it's tentacles. We touch out. We're the smart end of the biota that thinks about stuff and feeds that information back to the large-scale creature. And my own personal myth is that the creatures are just about to achieve maturity now and wake up. And the minute it does wake up, we all will suddenly have a central intelligence. Oh, fuck, you will realise that you are just a finger in a hand, which could be quite shocking for a lot of people, I'd imagine. Not so shocking maybe for people in this room, but certainly shocking for people sitting in boards of corporations and people sitting in seats of government, because they have been brought up to think of themselves as individual heroic figures who will change history by the weight of their hand. And it's not like that. We are the process. The process is unfolding through us. It's unstoppable. It's unfolding through them too. You know, Bush can't help being what he is because his entire history has led him to this place to play this awful role at this awful time. And we shouldn't hate our hand. You know, we shouldn't hate the hand. We just got to understand why some parts of the hand have got so disconnected and bring them back in.
So why would you separate the biota from the AI?
Well, I'm not even going to do that. I'm trying to make it, because I want to make it simple for people. We have to think about life first, because we are obviously part of that. But the rest of the stuff that's going on is that every single atom has been exchanged. The entire environment is passing through us. Like every 7 years, we are completely composed of different atoms. So, as I say, the whole thing's in constant flux. The thing keeps feeding itself. You know, the exact same amount of protons and electrons that appeared in the first second after the Big Bang are still here, still making all this stuff and constantly exchanging and moving around. And as I say, atoms that were you today will be in a child in 1,000 years' time. And she won't remember, you know, but they'll be there and they'll be right inside, and they were once you. So yeah, we're also constantly exchanging information with the world of rocks and minerals and non-solid things and the air. So yeah, I mean, the universe itself is probably the thing, but I'm focusing on life because it's a lot easier for people to take that on board without throwing in the idea that everything is literally connected, because then it just goes... Anything else?
How do you see or how do you define imagination? What do you think imagination's role is in this, particularly?
I think imagination is like the microscope. You know, that's what it does. It can look at things that are very far away or things that haven't happened yet. I mean, I think imagination, we tend not to imagine anything that we can't imagine, if you see what I mean. You know, everything is based on something that we can think of, and it's usually based on some process around us. So I think what imagination does is it fine-tunes things. Imagination allows me to see the biota. I can't do that using any other method. I can't look at my 10-year-old self except through imagination, which we call memory. So that's the window. So to me, again, cultivating imagination is cultivating a way to make meaning and to make magic and to see the world constantly in those terms and to constantly ask questions about, you know, where did those photons start? Where did the tin that was made? Where's that red light? Who built that? You know, because then everything takes on this immense significance and meaning, and it relates everybody in the world back to us as well in this room. So yeah, imagination is the telescope, the microscope of the modern era. Yeah.
Is there a requirement in magic to sort of have faith in the magic that you're using rather than some other magic? In other words, I found like, if we were talking about the fertility magic, I did some simple magic that helped me, I get pregnant.
Yeah.
Then we go off and do Western medicine, fertility magic, nothing happens for a year. As soon as we stop that, you know, boom, she's pregnant. We're told it can't happen. So basically, the original spell was waiting until it cleared the space.
Yeah.
Crap to come. But it's almost as if it's requiring a certain amount of faith. So in other words, if you're lying in a hospital and you're dying of something, you use the comic to do a sigil to get out. It doesn't mean you're stopping the antibiotics magic.
Oh, not at all, no, because if I hadn't had antibiotics, I'd be dead. But what happened? Yeah. No, the whole thing's a participation, you know, and it's really what happens to me? Someone else could have gone in there and survived on the antibiotics. I think I wouldn't have survived if I hadn't done the magic, and the antibiotics wouldn't have been enough, but I might be wrong. So all that's happening is that's where I add significance to those events, and that's how I get myself out of hospital, is to say that I'm a magician. I have the power to walk myself out. I can write myself out of this situation. Not only that, while I was lying in the bed, I decided to treat, I had a Staph aureus infection. It was pretty dangerous, and it was spreading towards my heart. So what I did was I treated the Staph as totem animals, and I contacted them and asked them to spare me, and if they did spare me, I would put them in my comic and turn them into the bad guys and give them this role as huge, terrible alien invaders from beyond. And they said yeah. And whether they said yes or not, I was convinced they had said yes. And I thought, okay, I'm fine now, I'm going to get through this. I've made a bargain with this animal, and it's going to let me live. So that was just me adding significance. If I didn't have that context, maybe I would have died, because my immune system would have been lowered just by fear. I didn't have fear. I was completely in control of the situation, as far as I was aware. Yeah.
You said corporations use magic. If we don't encounter stuff, they're going to take over.
Well, they kind of already have taken over, but we let them take over again. I mean, I'll go back as well to what Doug was saying, kind of the place we found ourselves, is that the corporations are only there because we want them to be, and they take advantage of it, you know, in the same way. And I see corporations as pretty much the same thing that people once called demons. In the olden days, any huge, or a god, you can call it a god or a demon. I'll call it a demon because I just don't think people function well attached to these ideas. Something like Walt Disney, for instance. Now, Disney's dead. There's no more Walt Disney, but Walt Disney, the corporate entity, persists. And people are born and grow up and want to join Walt Disney. I mean, how does that happen? Why would you want to be a Disney employee or a Sony employee? But people do. They grow up and suddenly find themselves serving these huge conglomerations of power and meaning. The person who created that doesn't exist anymore. So what you really do have left is a demon. It's a thing that's alive. It grows, it consumes, it interacts, it draws people into its sphere who are desperate to supplicate themselves in front of it and do what it wants. Why would anyone want to do what Coca-Cola wants, and yet there are so many Coca-Cola employees who do? Because they've become part of that egregore, that demon, that intent, which is so powerful that it's kept roaming long after the wizard who created it. So, yeah, we can fight that, but I don't know if we should. Some it's like trying to fight tyrannosaurs. It's maybe stupid, and the best thing to do is hide and evolve. And they don't worry about them, because they're just doing their thing, and they'll reach a limit as well. They'll hit their own not self, and suddenly they'll run out of product, and there won't be any oil. And, you know, things go wrong all the time for people. Or the corporate age will pass, and a better thing will come along based on the biota. For all we know, it could happen. If you guys take it to the streets, it could happen. So it's not about fighting so much as recognising them and naming them and understanding what to do with them once you've done it. And there are some demons you're stupid to take them on. It's just there's no point. You'll just get hurt. I found the best way to deal with corporations is to make one. And I'm sure Richard would agree. My wife and I got together and we just created GM Word, and it does nothing except it's my stuff, you know. But it's nothing, but it's an actual company, and we created it as a magical entity. We did, you know, a magical birth of this company, and it was just a way of trying those waters and seeing how that worked. And we set it loose, and it earns money for me, and it interacts with other corporations, and everything's cool. You know, it's like a little grouper fish next to a shark, but it works. And I found that was the best way to deal with them, not to fight them, you know, but to strike bargains. That's what people did with demons in the old days, and that's what smart people do now. And you can get in there, you can do things, you know, as I always say, we can be like a prion, which is a deadly thing that causes mad cow disease. But the prions get in, the immune system doesn't even know they're there, and they just start replicating until you're finished, you become the prion. We can get into culture, you know, I do comics, you can make movies, whatever, any way you're slipping this stuff in, and it will get slipped in because people want it. People need meaning in their lives. That's why they like the X-Files and Buffy and all those things. It gives them meaning and mythology and sacredness. If we can provide better sacredness, then we'll do our job. That's all we can hope to do, is give them more interesting images, better things to think about. You know, the Matrix brought Gnostic philosophy back after 2,000 years. That's pretty amazing achievement. and made people dig it. You know, if I couldn't do that, you'd bring out a book about the Gnostics, no one would buy it, but they made it into that action movie and people bought into Gnostic philosophy and started to see the world as a simulation. I'm sure that movie did more for our cause than anything else by forcing a mass market to think of the world as possibly not being real.
You could actually create a virtual world like online where you would duplicate what you see in reality online and reconfigure it online and try to add that to the real world.
Well, you could do that'd be an ideal. I'm really getting interested in the whole games area, and I've done a couple of things, but that seems to be the place where you could really do sigil magic at a whole new level, because you can create real models of things. You can create a virtual voodoo model of an entire city and start doing things to it, and that might have effects in the real world. I mean, God knows, probably the crime rate's gone up in Miami since Vice City came out, just by pure sympathetic magic. No, I think the whole idea of virtual worlds and creating those spaces, and even creating dream spaces and the kind of alternate dimension spaces, yeah, just allowing people to experience. The people who don't have really good imaginations can be helped by giving them really strong and powerful worlds that are quite obvious to. Anything else?
You talk about Biota. I mean, talk about this experience that was your feeling something that just the reality itself is true, this concept itself, this is the way that the world actually functions through time, that does this thing, in your opinion, have some kind of self-consciousness? Like, you know, there's been a lot of talk about our mass mind, and what we find when we play these neurons, each one can operate as an individual, if there's some kind of mass mind that works for me, works for you. Do you feel like this might has a mass mind?
I get the feeling that it was too young yet, and basically what we are is the leading edge of that mass mind immersion, that when we all realise it, that's when it becomes mature in that sense, that we are the actual record of its developing intelligence. And the smarter that we are today means that it's a little bit smarter today than it was yesterday. And that's how it seemed to me, that it was actually, we were actually the picture of its developing intelligence, but it was immature, so it didn't have a self-consciousness like we would consider it. It was developing towards a self-consciousness. Yeah.
So a lot of musicians in the past, including Peter Carroll, who's the guest, they advocated long periods of meditation and discipline. And you don't do that. You say,
Wank off. Well, I want people to have fun, you know. I'm a good time magician.
But why do you think? I mean, do you think that their method is more efficacious than, or do you think that, and because they're disciplining themselves, or do you think that we're past that and it's not necessary?
No, I mean, all that discipline stuff's still there. I mean, obviously, I read the Kabbalah for 20 years. I know all that stuff, but I found at the end that it wasn't really what it was about. But I kind of think you have to go through it, unfortunately. And I think there's nothing wrong with doing all the meditation, because all these things, if you study other magical systems like voodoo, I mean, I did voodoo for a while, I did Satanism, I did Buddhism, I did Crowley. And it's exciting, you know, it's like having adventures, but I found at the end of it really that what I was just doing was triggering nervous system events, and it was a bit more prosaic almost. But the prosaicness of it actually made it more exciting for me, because I realised I was cutting through bullshit. You know, once I stopped believing in the aliens, it made things a lot more exciting, because it made things seem more real. And I had to find better explanations, because aliens didn't seem to be cutting it as an explanation for me. So, where did we start there? I just went off and what was that? Yeah, so every one of these, all the disciplines are useful, you know, everything you do is useful, that's the thing. And if you're going to read loads of stuff that expands your mind, then that's cool, that's doing the thing, you know, there's nothing wrong with all of the disciplines. My way of doing it is just based on my love of pop and speed, and, you know, fashion, so it's kind of a bit more poppy, and it's a bit more instant, but it still works. Yeah.
Ken Wilber, who you mentioned, is a devout Buddhist, has practiced meditation for years and has written that ultimately it's worthless. Ultimately, the meditation itself accomplishes nothing, but doing it gets you where you realize that it accomplishes.
Well, Well, that's the thing, and it seems to be, it seems to be the same with magic. It's, you do all these rituals, and they work, and it seems really exciting. But the more that it goes on, the less it seems to have to do with what you're actually here for, and it falls away. And it's like, I don't want to demystify magic. I don't want to put people off wearing robes, because that's cool and it gets you in the mood. It's kind of gets you worked up. But once you've been doing it for a while, it's not about that. And to me, it's really just about this passage through time. Everything, angels and demons seem so much less interesting than bacteria now. Because I know they're there, and we don't know anything about that stuff. We just accept that they're there without ever trying to communicate or deal with that, or in the way that the world actually works. Like I say, the exchange of atoms between the micro and the macro scale, all that stuff is so in your face, psychedelic and weird, that you don't need angels and demons. Just dealing with that and processing that is so immense and so exciting that it's a lot more interesting to me than UFOs. Anything else?
How do you reconcile as someone who reads a lot of lore and you see like this charts and graphs and maybe more or less whatever it is to say, magic's pretty low.
Oh yeah, he's in purple animistic, but I think he's just got a bias against magic because he hasn't done it and it doesn't, he hasn't seen it work. I think he applies it to cultures, and there's a kind of fascism in the Wilbur model as well. That's quite. That's why I like him. Obviously, he's got that. He looks like me. But
in the evolution of it, he said every new aspect should encapsulate everything before. So I'm thinking perhaps in the evolution of spirituality, perhaps we've neglected magic to a certain sense.
I think it's both, because he really does downgrade it.
We worked our way up to more like Eastern traditions, more like take up the injunction, do it, and you get results. Which reminded me a lot of magic.
Yeah.
Maybe we can
Well, yeah, magic is very scientific in that sense. Magic is basically the scientific method. You do the experiment, you record your results, and you share it with your peer group, and exchange information. That's the scientific method, basically. Magicians do the same thing. Some of them maybe want to mystify the whole thing and make it seem like something you will never understand in order to put themselves in a priestly position, but it's not like that. Yeah.
Just to clarify, to actually fire off the session, it's not staring at the actual thing, it's having it in your mind.
Well, you can stare at it, that makes it easier, but have it in your mind. As long as you see it in your mind at the moment, then it should do its job, and then you try and forget about it.
Hold on to what the desire was.
Just the image, forget the desire. That's the whole point, because the desire has become the image so that you almost forget the original meaning of the desire.
Group sigil we can create now, and everyone.
Yeah, we should actually. Yeah. Let's make a group sigil. What can we do? These things usually work within 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years, I find. So, depending on how big they are. Group sigil? What is the group desire? What is the group desire? What are we really here for?
To take away this knowledge.
That's an easy one. There's always that chance, but I've well, thinking about it too much apparently messes them up. If you really start thinking about the desire, you go on, and it doesn't work because it confuses the thing has to be forgotten, which is quite difficult. But that's the whole point of the exercise, is to just let it go. Yeah.
Redundancy of effort kind of get in the way. That's what I was trying to say before. If so now we do this, but then if we go off and do some prayer circle things, so we try to stop doing what we can, and we keep doing other stuff, we can kind of.
And what they do, they seem to work best for very simple things that can be done. You can do it for. As the thing I always say is you can do it for a lottery win, but you have to buy a lottery ticket, right? So you have to also help the universe along which might just be making it easier. So when they seem to work less is when they're very wide. If you sigilise for world peace, there are just too many variables involved in that. There's just so much that could go wrong, and you're asking for too much. If you sigilise for you to be on the panel talking about world peace and add in your 2 cents, then you may end up getting an invitation to talk on a panel. That's the sort of way it would work. If you can say specifics, I want to find $10 today in the gutter, there's a really good chance you'll find $10 in the gutter.
Is there a match file? I mean, you had mentioned sigils for, visuals for
Yeah. Well, it did, because I had this big idea that I could just bring in this woman that I wanted to meet, and what I got was the exact visual of this woman, but not the personality. So I was being... and I'd met up with someone who we didn't get on at all, and it was just like 6 months of fighting because we were trying really hard to make this thing happen, because I had the actual image of the woman that I wanted, but she wasn't the woman I wanted at all. So in the future, this is another tip, if you're going to do love spells, if you're going to attract anyone into your orbit, the best thing to do with these is not to try and get a specific person. What you do is if you ask for someone who will, if you ask for the person that you need and not for the person that you want, right, and you'll be better off. Don't ask for a specific person or it's likely to go wrong. Yeah.
Did you explain to the woman that you would sigilise for?
I think I did actually. She wasn't she wasn't happy about it. But it wasn't even her. It wasn't a specific person. What happened was that I just had this image in mind of the woman from the comic, and I've got to meet her, bring this. And really all I was doing was fixating on an image, which I soon learned when all I got was a visual image, really. Yeah.
Person 3 words are it is, for is our desire. If I wanted to start saying, I will.
Yeah, you do that as well. I mean, really, these aren't hard and fast rules. It's just kind of the way I do it. You can, as long as you can put down a sentence, a desire, and reduce it to a glyph, then any way you want to do it and how it looks is up to you.
You just draw as you were thinking about a desire.
Yeah, that could happen as well, as long as you felt that it encompassed the thing and it stood in for it well enough. Yeah. I mean, these stages you go through are kind of ritual stages because it allows you to know that you're now doing something unusual. When you sit and you work it all out and you draw it out, it's just another way of putting you in a headspace. It's a ceremonial way of writing. But yeah, if you're in the headspace already, just draw the sigil. That'll do. In fact, don't even draw the sigil, just visualise it, and it'll work just as well. But that's advanced, yeah.
One thing I especially in regards to another person, is I always put conditions, something like it moves as well, establishment, benefit.
Yeah. Well, anything. I mean, basically, it feels almost like some kind of new science, even though it's thousands and thousands of years old, because people haven't been doing it for so long, or they've been doing it in a way that they haven't been able to talk about it like this and explain it as a technology. And it's open to be, explored and developed. I mean, I really want to see what people do with it and what results are coming in and how different people approach it differently, because as I say, it works, and it'd be interesting to see what happens if it works en masse. What happens when all the poor people in the ghettos start sigilising for record contracts? And if it really happens en masse, it might be quite interesting to watch mass desire enacting itself. Yeah. I learned this from the magician Austin Osman Spare, who was sort of early part of the last century, around about the same time as Crowley, and he developed this sigil technique, which was the one that I based mine on, and the chaos magicians in the 80s kind of revived it, and his was the vowel and consonant method. But I think you could do it anyway, really. It's just you could do a ballet as a sigil. You could make a piece of music, as long as you involve yourself in it to the exact amount required for the desire to manifest itself. That it should work. You should be able to do it on the condensation on a window pane. Any more?
Are there pieces of art that you're aware of in history?
I think there's lots of. I think all of Dali's work is this kind of thing, and there's probably before that. I mean, I'd need to think about the history of that. But yeah, I mean, people were doing this all the time, and people were using artwork to represent the world in order to make the world change for them. You know, every time Rembrandt painted a picture, he was making a new world, and he was wanting the world to change, you know, into the Rembrandt world. He was seeing himself. He was doing those portraits, and he was kind of, he was opening a hole into another world where we could see what Rembrandt saw. So those were sigils in that sense. He was allowing us to inhabit his skin. But I think there's specific stuff where people like, as I say, cave paintings are obviously sigils, and things through the history. When people draw battle scenes where they want to burn the enemy's boat, that's a sigil, you know. The fascist swastika is a sigil. You know, one of the great corporate sigils of our time, unfortunately.
You say that the corporate sigil, like, say McDonald's, are you saying that it operates that way?
Yeah.
At some point, people genuinely understood this is the way it functions.
Yeah, that may be. I mean, I don't know, but all corporations employ some very strange characters. You know, corporations use NLP consultants and hypnotists, and you know, they're playing a lot of tricks on us all the time. So it may well be that they're aware of this stuff, because they do use it. I mean, it's obvious the McDonald's sigil is something that people gather around. It has immense meaning and significance to people. So it works on that level, and when you see that flashing on the horizon, you know where to go. You know, it's the sigil that does the work.
But do you think they're expected to actually jerked off cheeseburgers?
I wouldn't put it past them. In fact, I'm sure they do it every night up at McDonald's. Yeah.
I think also, from the way you're discussing these, this is sort of the magical understanding of how symbol systems work. Or personal way to build your own symbol system.
Yeah.
And corporations are using, in essence, the same technology, except, you know, they may or may not be using the magical framework at all. Nevertheless, they're using the same.
Yeah, it's just, but I mean, what I want to say again is that magic is actually, it's not, again, to divorce it from the metaphors that have been used, and even the metaphors that I'm using of science or technology or whatever. Magic is just people's response to life. You know, it really is about, I woke up this morning and I felt bad, so I did a little charm to make myself feel better. And again, it's adding significance to existence. Magic grows out of life. So if you have a corporation and you find yourself living inside the body of what's basically a demon, like McDonald's, and you're working for it and performing its functions, then obviously you're suddenly doing magic. Whether you intended to do magic or not, magic becomes, as we were talking earlier, an emergent property of the system. You have to do magic because there's no other way to do your business. And even if you don't call it magic, it's the way things work. And you're trying to influence people's minds, you're trying to control people, you're trying to make them buy things. So these are the same methods that magicians have always used to get people to join their cults or their cultures. You're watching the magical process at work, but it might not necessarily be that someone sat in the boardroom with a pointed hat and said, we are now going to take over the world for Satan. Satan wins by default. I mean, really, I think the most important thing that we're getting from today is to be able to understand metaphor, you know, again, and schizophrenics can't do it. And it's really important that we have to be able to do it, because if you can understand metaphor, you can layer the world with endless layers of significance. And you can also understand that the magic of the past, we don't necessarily have to repeat those gestures. We don't have to learn to talk Latin. We don't actually have to learn the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah was purely an arbitrary system created by people, again, in response to the environment. And they saw that there were different personalities, and they saw that there was angry day and happy day, and they broke it down and they said that if you feel this, understand that you are in this sephira, but the whole human being is the tree. You know, the tree of life is actually it's a knitting pattern for the human soul. You know, it's got its 7 personality defaults, it's got a mundane pole, it's got a transcendent pole, and it's got a mother and father, and that's it. You know, that's everything you need to know to create a human personality. So to understand that that's all that was, and we could sit down and make our own structure. The Buddhists have got a slightly different structure of how to make a human personality. They recognise the same elements, but they give them different names and assign it to a different level and a different scale. So to understand all these things is to take it back to what is what are we actually feeling, what is going on, and when we do magic or when we interact with the world or participate with the environment, what is actually happening, to take it away from those symbols. And that's what that's why I want people to stop doing old style magic and just start doing magic that's to do with the way they live, you know. And this is what I wear for magic, not because this is the world I live in, you know. And I deal with demons that look like corporations, and I deal with, as I said, about roaming mindless laws, you know, things that have been created and then set loose and forgotten about, and they still punish people in the most stupid fucking ways. You know, why should you get pulled up for smoking a spliff? You do. It's some ridiculous law that somebody built and let loose and lost control of, and it has nothing to do with human reality or human experience. You know, the police know that hash doesn't do anything. They don't want to prosecute for it, but they're forced to obey the law. So, you know, suddenly reality is out the window and the law is sitting on everyone like a demon, like a hag. So these are the things I want us to understand, that we have different names for those things. Back in the old days, that would have been a hag, you know, that feeling of something's riding me, something's telling me. Now we call it, you know, the fear of the police. I'm smoking a joint, oh shit, you know, the internal policeman's like, whoa, they might get me. And that's fear of the demon, fear of the law that's creeping in the window, the ghost. So to understand that we are living in magic all the time, that we don't, it's not about the hats, it's not about even the sigils. The sigils are just one way of interacting with the universe and interacting with the environment. And to add our own metaphors, and everyone here can add their own personal metaphors. I have mine, I'm a science fiction comic writer, so my metaphors tend to be to do with dimensionality and science fiction ideas or biological or technological ideas, but everyone can bring their own narrative to this thing and participate in the magic and bring it to life in their own ways and bring their own kinds of significance to things. And that's really what I hope we can take from this, is not to go home and have to learn the Kabbalah, but to go home and start participating and start making your own magic and your own connections and quantifying your own psychic states and how to get there and how to do it and what works and what doesn't. But to understand that you can do all this thing, this is our legacy, this is stuff we should be doing, you know. As adults, we should be doing it, we should be taking control. That's it. As adults, we should be taking control.